Hello. The interview you're about to watch is a snapshot in time. At the point when we sat down for this interview, the city I was in had a handful of cases, felt like we were pretty much on top of it. Now we are at the point where we are back in lockdown, where cases are back into the hundreds, and that light at the end of the tunnel, there's still a light, it's a much longer tunnel than we thought. So we thought we'd put some context at the top of this interview so you know that the person you are about to watch does not know how bad things are about to get.
Hey James, thanks so much for joining me today.
Hello, lovely to see you.
So, how are you going? How has lockdown been? You're on the other side in Australia, aren't you?
Well, we were on the other side, but I'm in Victoria, Sicktoria or Plaguetoria as it's currently being called, because Australia pretty much had it beaten, and then a couple of like families and small gatherings in Victoria has sparked it back up. So now it's all of the country except us seem to be pretty much out the other side, and they're just banning us from going anywhere. It's
Oh,
like the
really?
postcodes either side of me are locked down, but we're technically still allowed to go up to the shop. So we're okay right now, but like we've got this the second wave, the rumored second wave is coming a bit here.
How does that work? Like with the postcodes? So what? Postcodes either side, but your little bubble is, or bubble or whatever it
It's very
is
it's
fine?
like there are places where one side of the street is locked down and the other side of the street is not, which is very straight. And there's like proper like blockades and things. There's like in the same way police would do random breath testing, they're doing driver's license testing and things like
Really?
making sure you're not leaving your area if you're from that designated point.
It's very interesting, like watching Australia handle the crisis versus England handle the crisis, because we're like, oh, we've got like 1,000 cases a day, we can open pubs, whereas Australia seems to be, no, we have 94 cases, lock it down.
We have like 60 today, and it was terrifying. Like it's
Really?
like, wow, that's far too many. That's a really worrying number. But that's like 60 across a continent,
Yeah.
of which they just happen to be mainly focused in Victoria right now. And the only times they've been in other states have been Victorians traveling to the other states. It's mostly doing bad for like the reputation of Victorians.
Yeah. And I guess, that kind of leads me on to like question, because Melbourne and Victoria, like that really is seen, maybe controversially to Sydneyites like myself, but like it's a real creative hub there. So like, is that affecting creativity at the moment, like in terms of like the arts sector, especially in Melbourne?
Oh, absolutely. So when the lockdown first started happening, it was I was actually in Adelaide at the time for the Adelaide Fringe Festival, which was like kind of just ahead of the breaking wave of like by the last couple of nights of it, we were genuinely people were starting to get the jitters of should we be performing in any kind of gathering of this sort. And then by the time we were supposed to finish in Adelaide, have 4 days, and then the Melbourne Comedy Festival starts up, and it was cancelled. Like it was gone by the time it was over. And that is like the International Comedy Festival. It's like Australia's Edinburgh. It's a massive, massive festival that not having it is shocking. But it's all like, so I came to, like yourself, I'm a Sydney boy, I'm like a Western Sydney born, and I came down here for work. But like it's always been like a big live music scene, live theatre scene. Like it's what Melbourne had over Sydney was people were allowed to go out at night, and now people are not allowed to go out at night.
Yeah.
There's just like nothing on, and like the Melbourne was starting to get the trickles of like stand up shows or things like that that have 10 people in the crowd or something of the sort, and now that's feels shaky again. But say we have had this week two different states announce that you're allowed to go to nightclubs, but there can't be dancing. So you have to sit in chairs and listen to the music socially distant.
No, no,
Hmm.
that is fantastic. Who is doing that?
That
See,
is
I kind of thought we'd kind of go back to like line dancing. Like, I don't know, like I just had this vision of like us just being like, yeah, okay, let's do some line dancing.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of like the sexual tension rising in a nightclub, like all can't touch, but look across the room, you know? But no,
Yeah,
we've got to sit on
long
chairs.
chairs. I actually had the thought, like, there's quite a nice spot around here for like a de-stress spot. That's like the Mornington Peninsula, known for its hot springs, and like it's just like. And I was looking at when we were like unlocking a bit. I like Googled like, oh, the hot springs open yet? And I had this sort of like sitting in a warm bath with strangers. I don't think that's opening for a while. I think there's going to be quite a gap before we get to open the hot spring again.
I mean, that's the question. When is the hot spring opening? That's when you know the lockdown's over.
Yeah, we've really beaten it.
And how did you find, so you were performing in the Adelaide Fringe Festival,
Mm-hmm.
and how did you find that atmosphere, and especially like coming out of it and coming from like the, you know, you can really get post show blues and things like that, and then going straight into lockdown. How did you find that kind of winding down after your show, and did you have any plans for it going forward?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting with that show because firstly so it was a comedic hour for like kind of a musical play, but it was about a washed up cruise ship performer who you know, has a terrible time, leads to a major pandemic and accident, and is a horribly sick man spreading diseases everywhere, and is also this washed up performer ending his career in crashing a cruise ship. So the one time we're doing a show that it becomes incredibly relevant, that you actually always want your shows to become topical, and ours became really perfectly topical, and then they closed down the festivals.
Oh my gosh.
What it mostly means for us is like, particularly like when you're like emerging kind of live performers, the Melbourne Comedy Festival is what pays your bills in Australia. Like, particularly with a show like this, you will do shows in Adelaide. It will be about a week, maybe a couple if you're a very established act. You will do 3 nights in Sydney at most, often in quite small rooms. We had 2 nights booked in a like medium-sized room. But then Melbourne, you have 30 shows. And so when you suddenly have that wiped out, like I'm lucky that a lot of my work and income comes from outside of live performance, but I know friends in the industry who have just saw their work wiped out before them. And not just people who were like, had shows planned, but people who would like plan to open their comedy venues, that this was going to be the grand opening, and they have put tens of thousands of dollars into building up bars and reputation and marketing and all these things. And then not only is there not going to be the major, like the payment of the festival, you also can't gather in large numbers for the next 6 months. Like, and if both of you, like both working comics, have lost both of your revenue streams as well, it's like there are so many situations like that that are just like I often feel like the financial impact we think about, like I had 4 shows and I could have sold them out and that would have been it. But like, I think it's more the amount of time and investment you put in early on for these shows, because you can take them and it pays off again and again over the next year where you get to tour it. We've now kind of lost a year. And a lot of people are saying like, I'll put that show in my pocket for next year. But it doesn't really work like that a lot of the time. You need like 40 minutes of your show might not be relevant anymore. Or like, particularly when it's comedy, it has to be so of the moment. And, you know, I don't know about you, but I feel like anything that was made pre-lockdown just doesn't get it. It just feels old now.
Yes, yeah. How do you even write that? And how have you found writing, and have you been able to write any satire or any comedy during a lockdown and during a pandemic?
Well, the good and bad side of that is I've been spending the whole lockdown working on a weekly satirical TV show in Australia called The Weekly with Charlie Pickering. So like it or not, we have to find 30 minutes of comedy to write in the lockdown, and it's going on air Wednesday night. So it has to be ready no matter how you're feeling. And like, so there are times like that, like there were particularly early on, like we were in pre-production when this started to kick off, and we had prepared a show that had functioned for 5 years as someone sitting at a desk talking to an audience. We have a room full of writers. We have a studio there, like we operate in this way. Since then, we have a skeleton crew in the office. I am the only writer in the office, and I coordinate a team over Zoom. I have never before had been coordinating a writers team where I haven't met people I'm writing with across the season. And so there's like this it's been uniquely challenging. And like beyond that, beyond the challenges of just making a show, which is about like any TV show takes like 60 people to put together if you want to look good and sound good. And then beyond that, you also have to change what the show would be, because you can't just go out like so many shows that we've seen that were hit, like that were on air as this was happening, suddenly had no audience and couldn't pivot. And it's just kind of weird, you know, a late show American host talking to a void, and it just feels weird. And a lot of our investment and time was, how do you make comedy in a void not feel weird? How do you make like jokes thrown out that way feel normal or feel natural? And, you know, we've had hit and miss that, but that's been like, you have all the technical challenges of putting anything to air. And then you have the extra technical challenge of, we have to relearn how to do a format that's been done for 80 years because it just doesn't work right now.
Yeah, I mean, how was that process? I'm so interested. How did you figure it out, or are you still figuring it out?
I think it's a constant battle, and I think we have like little, like we're making little tweaks every week, and there's bits of like, you know, what can you say? Like how, particularly with comedy, it's like, because you're expecting reaction, how do you move the other noises that happen? How do you move the sound after the punchline or the music bed underneath? Or do you have what we call a SOT, like a video clip of someone saying something that punctuates your joke or anything of that sort? But it's so like, the piece that I'm particularly in charge of is called The Week, which is the top of the show. It's about 10 minutes and it's summing up like, here's the 5 news stories or the 6 news stories that you really have to know about, explain what they are, making jokes about them. And to do that format, it takes a massive graphics team. It takes, you know, huge amounts of resource, but you also have to like really clip it along. And I love that. Like the good side of this is like, I don't think I would go back to the other format. I like it this way because I like things just, I like, this is a controversial view and one that I hold separate to the rest of the production, I believe, and most comedians and everything of the sort. But I believe the audience gets in the way of comedy.
Get rid of the audience. We don't need them.
Exactly. We're the comedy professionals. We know whether it's funny or not. That's what matters. Like, you just have bad instincts when you're playing to a live crowd, but you're actually watching it on TV, because you want to have something with the person, the human being in front of you that you want to empathize with, when really we're not playing to them. They're the backing ground for the whatever million people on the TV. But like, there's a lot of like tricks you can do and like just fun. That's what's been interesting about it for me. It's a wild creative challenge, and it's kind of the first time, like particularly when you're working on shows that are quite like, just by format and by tradition of the network, quite rigid in what they kind of do and what they're supposed to look like and things like that. Having the rule book suddenly thrown out leaves this really incredible void of like, what can we do in this space now? What, like, if no one's able to come in the door because, like, you know, we're diseased, they have to stay outside, maybe we can make something really cool in here.
But how did you also find, like, you know, stories to do every week during this pandemic? Were you able to be like funny with the pandemic? How did you find that?
Well, that's what's like that's a real challenge. And like, we also had to go against, particularly when it's really bad, when it was really in the first worrying peak and we did not know how it would go here. Luckily, like, Australia being on the downhill slide where it's like things have gone well now, it certainly opens it up. We can now more casually refer to the Roni, make jokes about it a bit more. Like, it's still, you want to be careful. You want to never be cruel or forget that this is a real thing that has hurt people's lives, but like, there is room there. Early on, we had the dual challenges of both sensitivity and wanting to make jokes, but also people just being burnt out and sick of it. Like, there was a lot of like, I just don't want to hear any more news about it, even if it's fun news about it. And I think the best trick to have there, or the thing that was most useful to us, was empathizing, of like really getting the idea across of like, this sucks and we're in it as much as you are. So like, we don't want to seem like we're still in fun TV world and we're sneering at how bad the world is now. It's like, no, we're by the couch with you. And like, a lot of our stories from that time were from the perspective of someone on the couch flicking through their remote or stuff like that, being like, here's what I saw and this scared me, or this made me feel like there might be light at the end of the tunnel, or I just wanted to get out and do something. Like, trying to connect to that emotional resonance your audience has, because they're also understanding this new world for the first time. Like, it's not like they've been and they're like, this is right, this is wrong. We're all just working our way through it. And I think having that acknowledgement that, like, who knows, we're winging it and we're hoping this works out. It's got a certain charm to it. It's Bambi on ice.
And in Australia, with the media, I wonder, how is Black Lives Matter, the pandemic, how is the media portraying both of those scenarios?
There were major demonstrations for Black Lives Matter and Aboriginal Lives Matter movements, and they were covered very heavily, but it was remarkable how quickly the narrative moved. And literally, I'm talking about the news reports when they were covering it. So that's that was what was insanely disappointing, how quickly we lost focus in the media of these issues that are still prevalent and still matter and are still in open court cases, are still being investigated now and have moments worthy of media attention throughout this. We have been so quickly about, it became, as I'm sure, and as I have seen in the UK, it was about statues. It was about vandalism. It was about, are these people going too far? Are they asking too much? Are they putting us all in danger? It was never about the simple message of the protest. And I think it's because there's just so much of this that Australians feel guilty and complicit with.
Have there been conversations within the television sector about Black Lives Matter, and are there deeper conversations happening around whether there need to be fundamental changes?
In a backwards way, something that this moment has proven to a lot of people in the media production companies and the groups, is that they were showing their ass the whole time. I don't think they've had a sudden turn to social goodness. I think they've realized that if someone saw a photo of their board, it would be horrifically embarrassing. I think they've realized that if they want to talk about the issues of the day and they can't talk about race, they are behind the eight ball. If they don't have people who can speak honestly from different perspectives, they can't cover the stories that need to be told. So I think there has been I don't ascribe any good vibes or good feelings or come to Jesus moments to anyone in these positions. I think they are scared of showing their ass publicly, and they should be, and it's about time they were. Yeah,
and educate yourself on what's kind of happening, and don't rely on anyone else to do that for you.
As my dear wife always says, you know about Google, Google it. You Google a recipe, why can't you Google what you need to do for this? Google it.
Yes. So true. There has always been debate in comedy as to what's taboo, what's not taboo. And I just wondered, everything that's going on with the pandemic, everything that's going on with Black Lives Matter, where do you fall with what's taboo, what's not, and where's the line for you?
So I think whenever we try and draw these lines, there's always going to be an exception around, or there's going to be something that definitely plays with it or whatever. I think the better way to frame the discussion, the way that I like to talk to comics about it, is that particularly when I was coming up and when I was starting in stand-up, when I was like 16 and doing this stuff, I would always hear comics talk about how comedy is an art form and deserves the respect of every other art form, which is something I believe and something I agree with. And I think that being the case, art comes with art criticism. Art comes with people reflecting and pulling apart your work and saying, what does this mean? How is this speaking to this? Is this truthful? Is this resonant? And is this cruel? Is this mean? Is this unfair? Is it a prejudiced depiction of someone? So I think that there is no strict, you cannot say this and you cannot, I feel that's often a framework that people trying to push against this pretend, because it's not like you're not going to be dragged away and thrown in chains because you make an evil joke. You just might not get the endorsement deal you already have. You won't get the praise that people want to lump upon you for being a funny person in the limelight because your actions have not been worthy of praise, that your work causes pain to people or your work is insensitive or blinded to other things. And if your art is something that you're working on, it should be able to stand up to criticism and you should be able to stand behind it. And if you can't, and if any criticism makes you crumble and makes you have to flee, then you need to examine the thing that you've made that put you in that position.
Yeah.
Is that somewhere in the line?
Yeah. I think that's so interesting as well. Comedy is often seen as, it's a form of entertainment. It's not always art in maybe the high art circles or whatever, whatever that is. I don't really know. I do fringe theatre. So
I think that's an interesting element of the discussion as well. That like comedy to me is it's a tool as much as anything else, in like a literary tool in your storytelling, to make something funny, to make something quirky and things. That's a tool as much as metaphor is a tool, as much as anything else is a tool. But then you have to ask again, what are you using that tool for? How is it being used? Where is it being directed? Because it's to say, like, if you're a fantastic painter, but all you make is hateful propaganda, you're going to be remembered as a propagandist, not really great brush technique. And I think that's like something that should apply across the form.
And so I guess this also brings me on to, any tips that you might have for any aspiring comedians maybe watching this, or anyone who might want to delve into comedy, especially during lockdown. Is there anything you'd recommend for people during this time?
There's a couple of things here. And the first thing I would say is, when I'm trying to fill a writer's room, when I have someone who I find is interesting or funny, or I find their voice or perspective different, I will want to, like, what I would have to do is say, let's say I get to pick my team for a writer's room. I then have to take my thought of having this person to a producer or an EP or whatever and sell them on the idea of this person. What I will say is that is so much easier to do if you have something out there. And it doesn't matter if it's great. You don't have to already have a blockbuster film or a screenplay or whatever. If you have a blog that is funny, if you have recorded, like, I feel like anyone coming up now is, 10 years younger than me and is able to, like, if I try and describe how you can make videos on your phone now, I'll be the oldest goddamn man. But it's making stuff that shows what you can do and sells yourself really well in that way. And I would say, in a similar way, and in the chaotic side of this same thought, have a look at all the people who you admire now, who you think are brilliant comics, or who are like the top of the pile. Have a look at your John Olivers and stuff like that, and watch what it's like when they are recording from their lounge room. And see that when you take away a lot of the shine of entertainment, they don't have special powers that you don't. They just work very hard on their craft, and they have for a long time. And then other people have jobs that are entirely aimed at making that seem even better. So if you take like that kind of baseline thing, you can do that, you're able to do that, and now you just need to make things that show you can. And the other part of it is also, if you want to just lie on your couch and play Breath of the Wild, that's fine. I've been doing that to cope a lot as well.
Yeah, well, how would you recommend people can cope during this time as well, especially if they're not feeling productive?
Well, I've been getting really into making big hearty meals and cocktails, and I would recommend not doing either of those because they will both lead you down terrible paths. So, no, I think that I often have it. I'm one of those I will ride until my arm falls off kind of people that I always have to feel like I'm working on something or I feel worthless. I will say a lot of the time in this, it's like something that settles my nerves a lot is the idea of you have time, and no one is watching over your shoulder. No one is saying, why haven't you put that thing out yet? It is better, I think, in a lot of cases, particularly when we're coming off the comedy festival and a lot of people just had their hour show disappear. There was this feeling of like, we have to go now. Like, we have to release what we have. We need to get something out there. We need to be filling this space. But I think taking a breath, taking a pause, and making something that's a bit more beautifully woven, that has more heart and thought in it, and that you really care about, taking the extra time now, even if it feels like now is the time to go, will end up in a better result. It's the old, like, what's this going to look like in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years rule? Like, will you still care about this? If it is a 2-second joke on Twitter, as I make too many myself, you probably won't care about it unless it's ruining your career. If it's something that you take, a month to take your time on and make something that you really like and are really happy with, you'll probably still look back on it fondly, because firstly, you enjoyed making it and it was part of getting better.
That's such great advice. That's brilliant. Well, I think that's all we've got time for. But thank you so much for sharing all that insight and sharing about comedy and what's going on in TV at the moment and just what's happening in Australia.
No worries. And I hope things look up over there.
All right, James, catch you later. Take care.
Take care. See ya.
Let's call it the first mistake. Why would you leave your nice little swampy home to venture out into the harsh and unforgiving sands of a new land? A primordial ooze doesn't sound incredibly appealing to me, but surely you had friends and family there. Or was that the problem? We know you were the original of your species. Did they hate you for that? Your little legs weren't like their flippers. Even the way the water circulated through you was a little odd. The tadpole said it made you a freak. Your parents told you that's what made you special, but you didn't know what to believe. You can't deny your parents were both a little odd too. The whole family had always been a bit weird, as far back as anyone could remember. But your parents had each other, and they had you. For however short a time, they had you. Tadpoles can be cruel. We all know that. Maybe they cast you away. I can't know if you walked out of the water or you were pushed. I can imagine that moment when you took the first step, though. When those little legs that had always held you back suddenly launched onto the sand and launched you towards your destiny. You'd be scared too. What could be more frightening? The sparkling water's edge was, to you, the end of the known world. Did you know that you were the first explorer as well? That's another thing that made you special. You're so brave. I don't think I could do it, really. I'm a coward deep down. But you're not. You did it. You burst your head through the water's edge and you entered a new world. How did it feel to take that first breath? It must have tasted magnificent. You felt your whole body come alive in a way you never knew was possible. In a single moment, you realized the purpose of your entire existence. You were literally born for this. And you weren't wrong. You were perfect. You're better than perfect. You were the next step. We know you fell in love too. We know this because we are your children. Did you go back to the water to tell them all what you had seen? What if they didn't believe you? Maybe they called you a liar and so many other awful names. Tadpoles don't like change. We all know that. Even though they know perfectly well it's adapt or die out there. They'll still fight it to the bitter end. Still, there was at least one pair of eyes filled with wonder looking at you. They wanted to hear about the world that you know and they never could. They wanted to be a part of your world. I think about the pride in your eyes when you brought your children onto the sand for the first time. To share that experience with someone at last must have been magical. You showed them the world that they would inherit, a home that stretched on forever. They would live their whole lives knowing that they were special. Isn't that wonderful? And I wonder how you felt, caught between the two worlds. The sand was special, of course, but the water was your home. Though in a way you never fully belonged in either. You were a stepping stone from where we were to where we were going to be. In a way, I suppose we all are, even if right now we might not be stepping in the right direction. But everything we do, everything we have, is because of your small steps. And I'm sorry about what we've done with the place. I don't think we'll be getting our bond back.